Okay, this is should Linux users hate Apple as much as Microsoft?
Many Linux users seem to have a general disdain for Windows and Microsoft, which is totally valid. But as for Apple, it receives some hate, but nowhere near as much.
Okay, I want to talk. Let's talk about that because it doesn't get Apple doesn't get nowhere near as much as hate. I don't know if I agree with that sometimes.
What, that Apple doesn't get as much hate as Linux does?
As Microsoft.
As micro Oh yeah, I totally agree with that. Apple definitely gets less hate than Microsoft does. But I would also argue that
It depends on what.
I would argue Apple's a less offensive company than Microsoft is. But I mean, you could argue that's a biased opinion. So
I picked a bad freeze frame of Brodie. Okay, let's just hit the button.
And I've always been curious why that is the case. So I've been doing a bit of digging around and came across a set of
digging. Huh, get it? Because the internet, you go digging. Sure.
General opinions that might explain why this is the case. This isn't every single
would you
possible
prefer the use of the term surfing? I went surfing through the internet.
We're gonna go back to the internet superhighway days. Yeah, no, thank you.
I went for a drive down the internet,
and then
down internet lane.
We have Al Gore saying, like, I took the liberty of creating the internet.
Reason, but this seems to be the general trend. I think the best place to start is with experience. Let me know in the comment section down below, but have you ever actually used a macOS system?
I'm sorry.
And I don't mean
I've
using
never
your
used
friend's
a macOS
device
system before. I have absolutely no idea what a Mac is.
Imagine if someone said that. All right, if you were like destitute in some developing country, yes, that's a politically correct term. You may I would give you a pass, okay? But if you live in the Western world, I would be like,
there's a surprising number.
I live under a rock, but maybe your rock is under mine. That's all I have to say.
You live under a rock, and so you never get out ever.
Twice, or using it at a store, just randomly hitting keys, or even using it during like a school computer lab.
School computer? I mean, all right, let me be transparent about this, okay? First time I ever encountered computers was university computer lab, okay?
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, of course. Like, what do you mean? Like, how else would you encounter a computer in the era when they were like $2,000 like per computer, pre-2008 money? Like,
some
colleges
schools had them in high school though.
Oh, did they? Not mine.
Yeah. My dad actually, his high school had some kind of a server. He used to play like Zork on his high school servers.
Oh.
Back in the oldie days.
Yeah, so I remember like I used to use like the Windows 98. I remember Windows 9. It's the one that stands out to me the most, Windows 98. You know, with that weird pale blue thing background. And
you know the worst part is when I was in high school, some of the computers that we had in our computer lab were running Windows 98.
Yikes. Yikes.
It was really bad.
Oh, so bad.
It's like, what did we learn in that class? We learned how to use Word. Like, sort of learned how to, we were supposed to learn how to use Word.
Did you? All right, here's a question. Did you have classes to learn Word, Excel, and PowerPoint?
Yes, and I actually ended up failing that class. Because it was so boring that I literally couldn't concentrate on actually doing the assignment.
Wow.
And then I moved school systems, and then it didn't matter anyway because the other school that I went to didn't have it. So, yep.
Modern education, love it.
Modern education.
I mean, it is your device, and you are daily driving it for a couple of months, a couple of years, any reasonable length of time to form your own opinion about whether you like the interface, whether you like the applications, whether you like, the way the store.
All right. Okay. whoever made the macOS interface needs to be thrown from a bridge. That's all I have to say. In a
Why?
Minecraft. In Minecraft.
Why throw them from a bridge in Minecraft?
Because like if you
I
just
mean,
use GNOME, that's all
I
I
mean, in all fairness,
literally in the
like
modern day and age,
the
just use
dock,
GNOME. It is
the
10
dock down
times
at the
better.
bottom of macOS is offensive. Like, I don't know any legitimate Mac user that has the dock constantly showing, and if they do, they have no idea what they're doing.
Or works and how you install stuff. Form your own opinion on how the system actually functions. I have used a macOS system for. I used one for like 3 or 4 years, but I feel like that's the exception.
Which one? All right, which one? Which one? I have so many questions now. 3 or 4. He said 3 or 4 years.
An
What? How
Intel
long
one.
ago was that? It has. Okay, Intel obviously, but like
Well,
how?
I mean, it could have been PowerPC. That is a possibility.
Sure. I remember I had one of those Power PC Mac. I still have one of those Power PC Macs lying around.
I actually
Um,
think I legitimately do have one lying around in like a closet somewhere.
Just going by the Windows market share, it's probably a good guess to say that before you were using Linux, you were daily driving Windows.
that was me. I
That
my
wasn't me.
Well, okay, maybe not you. The last Windows I used as a daily driver was Windows 7. Windows I was actually one of the people. I have, guys, believe it or not, I have not been using Linux for long. I've actually, the last time I used Linux was no, the last time I daily drove Windows was with Windows 7. And yes, I was actually one of the old curmudgeons who actually blocked the Microsoft nagging warnings, which actually would like tell you, hey, can you upgrade to Windows 10, please? I'm like, nah, no thanks. And I just kept doing that for like years and years.
And then you
I did find the
found
registry
Linux
key.
and you saw the light.
No, I installed Debian, and that all changed my life.
Was your first operating system Debian?
Yeah, my first Linux OS was Debian, or like from
Wow.
day one.
That's unusual amongst
It's
Linux people
incredibly
because it's
unusual.
almost always
Like I
like at
remember,
least these days
a
it's
lot
almost
of
always Ubuntu.
people, a lot of people said like, oh, you should try Ubuntu because like it was, the Unity desktop, blah blah blah. I actually do because I do have an Ubuntu 1604 DVD because I thought you were supposed to use a DVD. That's the way they implied it. That just tells you how poorly done all of these
I mean,
stupid terms
okay,
are.
in all fairness, it on almost any computer you touch, if you plug in a DVD drive and then put a ISO
Plug in.
of
My
some
computer had one.
well, if it has one or if you plug in one and you try to boot a an ISO image off of a DVD, it will almost always work. If you try to do it off of a USB, sometimes with some systems it doesn't work.
Yeah, namely PNY. PNY has like, I don't know what it is with their USBs, but something about PNY USBs on in Linux booting does not
Also,
compute.
if you've ever tried to boot off of Linux off of an internal SD port, it can be hit or miss depending on your system. Like some
It depends.
systems, for
Also
whatever
depends on how
reason,
much power can be received through your.
And maybe you're even still in a situation where you dual boot Windows and you have it right at hand.
You should. All right. Let me comment on that one because I think a mistake that a lot of people make, like, well, I shouldn't say mistake, but like, you kind of need to have like a setup that will allow you to like dual boot. Like, if if you have a laptop or you're using a desktop that lets you have multiple like drive bays, SATA bays or whatever, like then like I would say go for it, man. You do you. You can do it. Like you'll actually that's actually what I do because I still have Windows 10 in my computer float. I'm gonna have to get rid of it because freaking Windows 11. Now I know there are workarounds to like getting Windows 11 to work, but like on like unsupported systems, but like Windows is just getting worse and worse, and it's like I need to like not. Pretty much, I literally have no excuse at this point. Like I have like no need to actually use it, and it's just really bad. But like if you don't have that kind of setup, you don't have like a laptop or a desktop with multiple bays that allow you to like mount like extra drives, like you just don't dual boot because like there's all sorts of problems with the Windows bootloader where like if you like put them on the same drive, Microsoft is just their bootloader is just like, oh, I can't see what this is. Maybe I should just delete it.
Yeah. Oh, what's FE partition? It must not be important.
And then I'll just delete your bootloader. Yeah, because and then if you're on a Mac, you should dual boot, like just on the same drive. Mac OS won't delete your thing, and like you need to because that's how you get updates to your firmware. Assuming you still get updates to your firmware. that's a
That
that's a
is true.
big that is a big if. But you can just have like a spare drive of Mac OS floating around, unless your Mac is so old that like Apple will refuse to let you download that OS anymore. They do let you download the last two OSs back, so you can still download Mojave was it? Yeah, you can still download Mojave, but not like High Sierra, for example.
Really?
Yeah, so there's a hidden. They still have available on their website the downloads to Mojave. It's fairly funny. There are actually people who actually take advantage of this to build macOS virtual machines or Docker containers. Yep, it's a real thing.
Meanwhile,
But to new and old Windows users alike, and especially the people that have experience of both systems,
Me, literally me, literally me. I know I have experience of like all three. I know Mac, even though I don't own a Mac computer. I think it scares people like how much I know about Mac OS, probably
I,
more than even like senior Mac people.
I feel like the way that most people function with systems is there's one system that's their primary system that they understand the best, and then they tend to frame their understanding of other systems on that system. So for me, that's Mac OS. So I understand Mac OS the best, and I frame my understanding of how Windows and Linux work on how Mac OS works. But I mean that does start to fall apart
Mac OS
depending on
does have
feature
the
sets.
benefit of being the most, I guess, selfish operating system. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's because I mean, you can interpret selfish however you want, whether it's selfish for the user or selfish for Apple's corporate interests. Like it still works because like that's kind of how macOS functions. Like yeah, basically that yeah, I'm going to shut up.
Windows is generally seen as a fairly buggy operating system, especially
Yes. We're the worst operating system ever. Actually, I would argue there's worse than Windows, believe it or not. I believe there's
Temple
far
OS
worse.
is pretty bad.
Temple OS, like BOS or Haiku or whatever. Let's not go back to those. I did use OS2, but
I mean,
not.
in all fairness, when we're talking about operating systems, we're saying Mac OS, Windows, and oh by the way, Linux exists a lot of times.
I would say
And
Windows,
what the
Mac
heck is
OS.
BSD?
Yeah, no,
If
BSD has
if
even a
you
better place
ask
because
if you
BSD
ask
is
the
not a
average
desktop operating system; it's a server operating system. Pretty good server operating system, if you ask me.
if you ask most people, list off desktop operating systems. First, they would say, "What's a desktop operating system?" Then, after you explained it, they would say Windows and then Mac. And then, if they were a real nerd, they would also list Linux. And I think that's how most people
No, they're
function.
gonna list Chrome OS.
Chrome OS. I even
if
Sorry, sorry.
I even forgot Chrome OS existed.
you're looking at something like Windows 11, for example. Whereas if we look at an Apple system, even though they may be incredibly locked down, they typically just work.
Selfish again. Selfish. The most selfish
they
operating
typically
system.
just work, and then
Unless it
there's a
doesn't.
jump cut.
What do you wait? What do you mean jump cut?
He said they just work as if he was going to explain more, and then he just cut there.
No. Oh, that's what you meant. Oh, yeah, because I didn't see that. I didn't get that far in my playback thing. Oh wow. All right. Okay.
As long as you don't need to physically repair them, that is a whole separate issue. And on those rare
repairing Apple computers. What a meme.
it is still running ZSH, and you have a terminal there that works like you'd expect a terminal work.
Didn't you say they ship like a broken version of ZSH or like an old version of ZSH or something?
In WSL?
Mac.
On Mac, oh yeah, Mac has an outdated version of ZSH, and if like Apple Silicon is what Apple's transitioned to, the one that Apple ships, the version of ZSH that Apple ships, is an Intel binary. if you want to run the Apple Silicon binary, the one that Apple should be shipping, you actually need to have you have to install Homebrew in order to run your system correctly.
Work on a Linux system. You can run a lot of the same terminal applications, not
No, all right, Brody, we're gonna correct you here. That's a total joke. You can't even use Docker on macOS right now. It's really bad. Like, yeah,
I would say I would actually disagree with you. I would say a lot of the same programs you can run on the terminal version of Mac.
but not Docker. There's
Yeah,
actually,
you can't run Docker. You would have to use
but that's
something
the
like
problem. Like a lot of developers who do that sort of thing use
you
Docker.
could use multipass, as we've discussed
But
before.
that's such a crap solution for
It's a it's
just to run Docker.
it's
That's
a
a pretty
fine
crap solution.
solution.
That's a pretty
They
crap
actually have an
solution.
install that's specifically Docker. Like you don't have to run. Well, I mean, I guess it is. Is it running a virtual machine? I don't even know. I'm not sure. They do have
No,
a version of
you just-
Docker. I think it's yeah.
Yeah, it's bad. It's just bad. There's a reason why Linux is becoming more popular because than Mac OS because it's just unusable. Docker is unusable on Mac OS.
So if you do heavily use the terminal, you don't feel completely lost with what's going on. Whereas over on Windows, yes, you have your DOS prompt and yes, you have PowerShell, but those feel really weird, especially
I would also argue that despite the not the shell that you're using, but the terminal that you're using in Windows, every Windows terminal that I've touched is horrible.
Unless
like
you're using Windows Terminal,
yeah, I mean, but even Windows Terminal, like the Windows Terminal, the one that ships with Windows 11, is like passable maybe. It's like
Really?
the first
I
thing
think
that doesn't
I
feel absolutely
don't agree
horrible.
with that. I think Windows 11's terminal. I don't think it's as good as
Like the
GNOME
difference
or the standard Linux ones, but I
the
still believe it is far more powerful than Mac's or Mac's terminal, for example, or the
difference
older Linux terminals.
the difference that I feel is on I mean I use iTerm. I mean Apple's own version terminal is horrible. You shouldn't use it. But if you're using something like iTerm, with iTerm I can forget if I'm just doing stuff in the terminal, I can forget that I'm using a Mac. Like it's the terminal the terminal doesn't get in the way ever for whatever it is that I'm doing. Whereas with Windows, very often the terminal gets in the way of what I'm doing. There's all kinds of things. It even if you're using WSL, it feels like you are using Bash. It feels like you are running running Linux in a Windows terminal because there are all kinds of quirks of how Windows's own terminal works that basically nothing else does that way. I mean, little things like, oh yeah, if you want to like scroll back as something is printing down at the bottom of the page, nope, you can't do that. It won't let you. Like, what if I don't want to have what if I don't want to have middle click paste whatever's in my clipboard? Nope. It's going to do it anyway.
if you've not used PowerShell, just go and
You've said that for the millionth time. Okay, we're gonna keep going.
experience it for like 5 or 10 minutes. But Windows does have WSL now, Windows Subsystem for Linux. But with that, you're basically just gluing a Linux virtual machine onto your Windows system using Linux in
Sort of.
It is a little bit more elegant than that.
Yeah.
In all fairness,
He's correct, but he's also not correct.
I mean, but like if you launch WSL, you would think, oh well, it's a full-fledged Linux operating system. It should be taking up like 2 gigabytes or something of RAM.
No.
It takes like 15. It's really, really light in the grand scheme of things.
Well, it's because parts of the Linux, like a minimalistic Linux kernel, is in Windows because for this reason. Like it's part of the process when you install WSL. Like
and all that means is that Windows is extra bloated, and the fact that Windows is extra bloated in this weird instance means that it's actually slightly less bloated.
yeah, basically.
in Windows, and then it makes the Windows experience better because you ignore the fact that Windows exists. That's a nice thing.
Didn't you say literally the exact same thing of Apple? Is this like a Zoomer thing? Is this what kids do these days? Like,
Wait, about what?
He literally said like, so you can forget that Windows exists, and you literally said, "Oh, I use iTerm, so I can forget that Apple exists."
Well, I mean, I I think that
Is
the
this how
gold
the
standard
mindset of Zoomers?
I think the gold standard for doing things in the terminal is Linux. And when it comes to doing things in the terminal, both Apple and Windows's mindsets are make the terminal go away. Like if Apple had their druthers, they would kill the terminal. They would just stop, not allow you to touch the terminal at all. I mean, that's what they do in iOS. And I would say that Windows largely would do the same. It's just there are things that you can do in the terminal. It like from a usability standpoint, there are things that you can do in a terminal that you couldn't possibly ever dream of doing in a GUI interface. And that's why the terminal hasn't died yet. And so Mac and Windows are trying to kill the terminal, whereas Linux operating systems embrace the terminal, which is why I think a lot of people kind of associate. I mean, I don't even think kind of. I think a lot of people associate the terminal with
Literal
Linux.
brainwashing. It's all copium. You need to learn the command line of whatever operating system you're using. That's that. There you go. I said it. You need to use a command line of whatever operating system you're using. It's an absolute necessity. If you don't, you need to.
Anytime they touch anything remotely open source, people worry they're going to make some big modification to it that everybody's going
No, I'm pretty sure he's gonna disclaim it. But he's gonna say no.
to rely on. They're going to absorb it into their system and then destroy it for anybody else to use.
Sort of.
No, they'd never do that. They've never done that before.
Concerns over Microsoft trying to lock down computers, stopping Linux from being installed. The most
Yeah. I mean,
Okay, so
I'm gonna
in
let him
all
talk.
fairness,
Let me let him talk. Let's let him talk.
Okay.
I'm gonna let him talk. I'm gonna let him talk. I want to hear it first.
recent example of this was the Microsoft Pluton chips, where they handled security.
Okay, I want to talk. All right, let me run my mouth.
what is
I
a
know
Pluton?
I know what he's gonna say. I swear this is like the fourth time you've asked me what is Pluton. Okay.
That maybe maybe it's just that it's so unimportant that my brain
It
can't
is
remember
not unimportant. Like Pluton is actually like such a big deal. And I wish like more people would give AMD and Microsoft credit for Pluton. Yeah, AMD is one of the chief creators of Pluton. I'm pretty sure AMD's
Pluton, a body of intrusive igneous rock.
that is the real thing, not what it is. Pluton is basically TPM built into CPU architecture. So
Okay, I
it's
do
the
remember you explaining this to me before.
yeah,
I just forgot the
Pluton
name.
has direct integration in AMD's chips, and it was jointly developed between Microsoft and AMD. And on Intel, you can use Intel Secured Core, um, which we didn't talk about in a video before, but it is actually a feature that's a part of Windows 11, um, and the newer Intel chips, which is sort of similar. I would argue that in terms of architecture, like Intel is just better because one, you can remove the management engine from you can disable the management engine. But the other reason is because secured core is a more minimalistic architecture compared to uh Pluton and AMD have to offer. Say AMD, if you're looking to use an AMD chip though, make sure it has Pluton. And if you want to use Linux on it right now, you can disable Pluton, but there is support for in newer versions of the Linux kernel that will support Pluton because again, I am being prophetic here. The secure boot bandwagon, like get on the secure boot bandwagon. Don't be like system. I found this out the other day after watching a video from the new oil. He said like the System 76's BIOS don't let you install Windows 11 because they don't have secure boot and there's no way through their interface to turn on secure boot. So then I'm just like, should I even buy System 76 computers now?
Yeah, but what does secure boot do? It makes sure that
It makes sure
you're
people don't load arbitrary operating systems like through malware. It's
no,
like
but it doesn't do that. What it means or what it does is it prevents you from loading a different operating system unless that's been signed. Someone could very easily sign their own operating system or have a modified version of Windows that is a perfectly valid modified version of Windows that just happens to have malicious software on it.
Yeah, but
It's
boot security on desktop machines is awful. Like, this is the
it's
reason why.
it all it does is it says, are you part of the in crowd? Yes or no. And if you answer, and if it's yes, then you can go. I've literally had this issue before because like my grandmother wanted to like wipe an old computer, so I was like, oh yeah, I have Ventoy with me. I'll boot up one of my images and wipe the system, and I couldn't get it to boot. And the reason that I couldn't get it to boot was because she had secure boot enabled
Do
on
you
that
want to know
system.
what you're supposed to do with Ventoy? I'm going over this in a future video. You
Can we?
install your own secure boot keys through Ventoy. This is actually a feature in Ventoy. Yep, bet you didn't know that one. No YouTuber
Yeah,
ever covers these things. They're always just like, turn off secure boot. No, we need to stop. We need to stop. We need to be using secure boot. We need to be using like
I think that secure boot
secure
is a
boot.
better idea than it is in practice because in practice it doesn't actually do anything.
Well, that's
Because
the
in
problem. You're an end
practice,
user. End users would be like, well, I don't notice anything.
now if it's an enterprise system, heck yeah. If it's a work laptop or something, heck yeah. If you have some system administrator who's has a BIOS lock on the system, it's a great thing that they can do that. But like what it also means is if I don't know if I want to take my Ventoy image
Do you
or my
want it?
live boot
But I
image and go
told
to the
you're
library.
supposed to inject your own keys using Ventoy, which you can do. Or you use Ubuntu and Fedora, which just supports secure boot out of the box. Like, if you weren't using Ventoy and you were just had a USB with Ubuntu or Fedora, you can just install it without having to disable secure boot. Go.
Pure boot a bit differently, and by default, distros could not be set up. This was not actually a real
Not true. Not true. You can do it through Ubuntu and Fedora. It's a thing. Whatever.
concern, it just required a bit of extra tweaking. But anytime something like that happens, it is seen as an attack on open source.
It is an attack on open source.
No one isn't. Some people are just stupid. That's all I have to say. It's just they're just all of these misinformed people are just brainwashing everybody. Like, that's not how it works.
I mean, in all fairness, I haven't been informed on this. I haven't had conversations with anyone about this. I haven't read or watched any videos about this. This is my own personal opinion that I came to the conclusion of on my own in a vacuum.
You go look up Secure Boot on my favorite Microsoft page. Because remember, Secure Boot is a Microsoft thing. And you actually go through all the stuff here. Microsoft actually has an incredibly detailed thing on basically why you need to use Secure Boot and all the requirements for it. Now,
Whereas on the flip side, Apple is very clear about their intentions.
clear about their intentions? Are you serious?
Windows is like, well, we don't want you to do it. Mac is like, stop asking, go away. You can't do this.
Apple is not clear about their intentions at all.
Apple's clear about their intentions. Their intentions are, we don't want you to do it, and we will do things to prevent you from doing it. That's Apple's intentions, and they don't try to hide it. Windows is like, we'll try to play nice, maybe. And I would say Windows tries to take a little bit more of a middle line approach, and Apple is just flat out like, no. It's like, we changed our hardware architecture to something and we have no documentation for it. And so people literally have to reverse engineer system calls in order to get a Linux operating system working on our machine.
No, actually, if you watch Lena's stream, she is reading official Apple documentation in the process of reversing the engineering. That's not true. Go watch her video or streams. Don't watch them. They're 10 hours long. How does someone stream for 10 hours long? It's like a thing that people do.
And no amount of good PR or user copium is going to change that because they just outright say what they're doing.
Nope. That's a total lie. Anyone who's seen Apple's events knows that's not true, Brodie. I'm sorry. That's not true at all. That's not true at all.
They want to have a walled garden ecosystem, and they pretty much have it. But with the walled garden, they don't care what's happening outside, and we don't really care what's happening inside.
That's not true. I care about what's happening on the inside. See, we can't have this kind of acceptance in society. We need to actually figure out what's going on underneath. And like at least Apple is slightly better about okay, it depends. Because like Apple is arguably much worse about this than Microsoft is. Because like
What about
Microsoft,
saying trust us? It works somehow.
yes, which is
Yes,
bad.
they are
It's
very bad
really
about doing
bad.
that.
Like compared to Microsoft. Now, I'm upset because Microsoft deleted Channel 9, which is like a full like guide on how to use some Microsoft server stuff, which is really stupid. But like you can still go to Microsoft Learn, formerly known as Microsoft Docs, and like still like look up in detail like the thought process to like why Windows is architected to like at least why the process of why stuff in Windows is the way that it is and ways to work around it.
But like, here's the
But
other thing.
Apple has no such documentation.
But in the grand scheme of things, it's happening on the Apple hardware. The Apple hardware is
Oh, I know what he's talking about. He's talking about like system integrity protection, basically. Okay, I got it. I got you.
Okay.
Terms we understand. Okay.
complete. Happens there, it doesn't really matter. And while they don't really try to help anyone, they don't really try to stop it either.
That's my point. Okay, that's not true either because they do try to stop people. Are anyone remembers like back in like the Big Sur days? They did try to like yeah, VPNs essentially permanently leak traffic on macOS. But then after Jeffrey what's his name wrote that article, um uh everyone lost their collective minds, and then like Apple
Then
was like,
Apple
"Oh, just
backpedaled.
kidding, we're not doing that," but they didn't say that. They just deleted the manifest,
Well, it
and
still
then they
does it
just
on iOS.
yeah, of course it still does it on iOS because no one panicked over that, but everyone panicked over the one in macOS, and
I
that's
mean,
just sort of like the hypocrisy of like Apple and the hypocrisy of people, to be honest.
I mean,
But
on one hand, I can see why they did it. On the other hand, it's a really stupid decision.
no,
Because
it's a
what it
bad
is,
decision. If you actually hear from people from Google Project Zero, like if you're familiar with how Google architects some of their like cloud applications and programs, like privileging your own applications is a vector for attack in a lot of macOS and iOS vulnerabilities, and it has been used by nation states in the past, like to like exploit people's devices. This is a real
yes,
thing. Like the only reason why iMessage had to receive like a super special like sandboxing on macOS and iOS is because of China. Like the Chinese government was taking advantage of a one-click or zero-click solution in messages, and this solution was the only reason they were able to take advantage of it was because Apple forces all non-Apple applications to be sandboxes, but not messages. So, and after Google Project Zero thoroughly thrashed them and security journalists ran their reporting, Apple was like, hey guys, look, we have this new thing called Blastdoor. It's going to fix everything. Spoilers, it didn't
neato.
fix everything, but it was still a big upgrade because now at least they understand that. But I don't know if the same is still holds true of other Apple applications. Like, there was a bug in FaceTime where you could silently call if you entered in the right number into the phone app and then called someone on FaceTime through the phone app. You could silently call someone on FaceTime and they wouldn't even know. Like,
Wow.
and this was back in like 2017. Yeah, I bet you didn't remember this one. That was a real thing. So yeah, you could silently call someone on
Well, I mean,
FaceTime.
that's a really easy solution. We just remove the battery on our device. Oh, wait.
Yeah, turning off your Apple device won't even help you either because there's also this horrible thing called the Find My network, which
Well, I
could
mean,
potentially be used to pinpoint where you are.
that's the thing is like I hope the EU legislation goes through on that requires like mobile devices batteries to be replaceable so that you can just pull out your battery. It'd be nice.
Yeah, but the issue of Apple's Find My network
I mean, I guess
is,
if you could pull out the battery on the Find My network, it would cease being useful, right?
but the other reason is, with the Find My network, the forget what I was gonna say. Oh my gosh. That's how you know I'm getting old. The Find My network has this thing where your phone can be traced if you're powered off. Not unless you're my phone and below. So any phone that was the iPhone SE 2020 and below means your phone cannot be tracked through this means because it's not a feature. Yeah.
Yes, but
So if you have
essentially
an
what it's
iPhone
doing
11, for example, it doesn't apply because the iPhone 11, your phone, was made before they had announced this change.
Back in 2007, Apple purchased and became the main developers of cups. And till this day, they still use cups on their system.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. But you know what Cups does on both Linux and Mac? What you do need to do is you need to go to a certain folder. I forget what the folder is, but if you go to that folder, delete your print history because they store your everything you print forever. Yeah, that's the one problem with Cups.
Mac does that with a lot of files.
It's
a lot
not
of
no, I'm
files.
talking about Cups, which is made by Mac, but it's used by Linux too, like Linux and
Oh,
BSD too.
does Linux do the same thing?
No, it's the exact same system because it's part of one of Apple's open source initiatives.
Oh, neat.
So you need to be aware that in /var folder, I forget which one it is, it does store a copy of everything you print forever. So I'm throwing it out there because it is something you need to be aware of.
So if
like,
you've
if
like
you have
recently printed anything or ever printed
so if
anything
you
with
have
like
printed
your
any
social
of your,
security
so if you
number on
printed a
it,
screenshot from your favorite anime, you can't. You need to delete that folder. Okay.
otherwise there's evidence. I mean,
On the Linux side,
sorry.
there is a
Sorry.
yeah, I was just saying evidence. There's
okay.
a vulnerability.
Okay.
fork of it used called Open Cups, but it's still based on that same Apache.
Yeah, all right. That's another thing on forks. Yeah, forks that are like this, which are like, oh well, we got rid of the Apple-y bits. Like, not really a point. Just one from your distro. Like, my mind is like, if you can still use it, and it's not like maliciously calling telemetry, and we can still, even if it's proprietary, you can still like easily figure out like what the application is even doing. Like, as long as it like respects your privacy, and like it's fine. Even in the open source world, like people who are like, well, you should use VS Codium. But like if you use VS Code and you turn off the telemetry, it's still kind of the same thing, and it cuts out a party. So like, just throwing it out there. That's just I'll make it flack for that saying that.
Source code. And Apple doesn't care about Chromium browsers, so they have web.
No, they don't, because WebKit is awful. Like literally, like the one browser that if I were to pick, like say like, hey, yeah, well, browser should I use on a Mac? Just use Chromium or Firefox. It's literally an upgrade.
Yep.
WebKit. WebKit is what they use to build Safari, but WebKit is also open source and is used.
Yep, we talked about that, and we'll talk about that soon. Yep.
For a bunch of these smaller browsers you see on various Linux distros like
smaller browsers you shouldn't use, by the way. And it's incredibly frustrating to me that like when I see like you can see a bunch of videos right now floating around of like Elementary OS's like new release or whatever. First off, Elementary OS doesn't let you upgrade between versions. So like if you go to 6, you can't upgrade to 7, which is stupid just because it's a different Ubuntu version. Whoever made that decision is like, that is such an awful decision. You don't even know. Oh my gosh. But the other problem with Elementary is, are you familiar with the default browser in Elementary is Epiphany? Are you serious? Are you serious?
I don't even know what Epiphany is.
Exactly. Don't use it. Basically it's GNOME Web. Don't use GNOME Web, Epiphany, whatever it's called now. Don't use it. It's complete waste. Like, it's based on WebKit. WebKit's run by Apple. WebKit bad. Okay, great.
the GNOME browser and things like that. And Apple also puts a lot of work into LLVM.
Again, I talked about, GNOME browser. Yep, you mean GNOME Web? Yep.
And Clang. All of these things are generally treated.
Didn't you say that Clang is still using the x86 version and not the ARM version?
Clang is using the ARM version, but I guess it's the front end for it is still using the x86 version.
Oh.
So Clang in the background is using the ARM version, but yeah. So if I say make version, it says i386 Apple. Whereas if I say gmake, which is the alias, and then say version, it's AR64.
Wow.
Darwin 11.3.
That'll tell you a whole lot. It doesn't. Kernel versions of macOS don't tell you a whole lot. Just
Well, the current kernel version is 21.6 as of my system. So yeah.
As fairly positive expeditions. Whereas on the Microsoft side, even though nowadays they are a lot more friendly towards open source and a lot more friendly towards Linux, Microsoft loves open source, all that.
I remember when they were parading around those photos of Satya in front of that picture. It was I think it was, I forget when it was. It was way before they bought GitHub, by the way. I think everyone gets that photo. That photo still was paraded around when Microsoft bought GitHub, but that photo was actually, I think, in 2016 or 2017 or 2015, where somewhere around then. There was that photo of Satya of the Microsoft Hearts open source thing. Famous photo. You can still see it in news articles today.
Fun stuff. Traditionally, that was not the case. They did not support open source.
Yeah, because Steve, are you familiar with why Microsoft didn't like open source? There's actually one political instigator at Microsoft, which led to Microsoft actually despising open source. And it was Steven Sinofsky, who was the architect of Windows Vista, and I believe he left Microsoft in the Windows 8 era. But Sinofsky was responsible for the creation of Vista 7, 8, and 8.1. And like a lot of things, like many people make the argument that like in Microsoft insiders, like they hate Sinofsky. And even people who worked at Microsoft at the time really did not like Sinofsky, because Sinofsky had this thing where he would often downplay like what journalists were reporting about Windows, for whatever. But like he would do it in a very hostile way, and that's the problem. Like whether they were true or not is one thing, but the way he did it was just not very friendly at all. And he had like severe attitude problems. Like he was the responsible for getting rid of the start menu in Windows 8. Okay, that should tell you enough about about Steven Sinofsky. But like when he left Microsoft, like the PR team had to send out apologies to like all the reporters who he insulted, basically. And like they basically said like they were basically like, it's like, we're sorry because this guy's kind of a jerk. And politically, there's a lot of stuff that Sinofsky put into Windows that's still in there today. Like, are you familiar with who the original creator of the Microsoft Store was? Steven Sinofsky. Are you familiar with where the little widgety bar came from in Windows 10 and 8 and Windows 8.1? Sinofsky.
Sounds like he had vision, but not the kind of vision we necessarily like.
It's not the kind of vision that anyone wanted, really. And like the problem is like because of how much power and like the almost dictatorship that like Sinofsky had within Microsoft, he was essentially allowed to basically like control everything about Windows.
Not just not support it, they actively did not like it. But a lot has changed.
Again, that was all Sinofsky. I'm pretty sure a lot of internal people at Microsoft didn't. And it's funny, which is sort of true because the internal people at Microsoft who didn't like it, Microsoft didn't really try to fire them or whatever. So this was a thing. Like the guy who created PowerShell was told to stop. Like that's just the kind of company. Like I don't know. I think Sinofsky or Ballmer saw what he was doing, and they were like, "Can you stop?" Like, and it's like, guys, that's awful. PowerShell was one of the best things ever happened to Windows. Unpopular opinion, but in my mind, I think PowerShell was a good stepping stone for Windows overall. Like, if you want to hear like the worst thing to ever be introduced in Windows, it was the registry. And that was back in Windows NT. Whoever introduced the registry was like, well, we don't like Linux or Unix. No, it was Unix because Linux was just like some sort of weird Swedish kids college experiment at the time. So it was really just Unix. It's like, yeah, we don't like Unix. Screw Unix. We're going to make our own thing. It's going to be better. And it was actually much, much worse because everything is recorded in binary and still is recorded in binary. Like,
it's also very poorly documented, and there's a lot of features that you can change in registry edits that you can't find anything anywhere in any program telling you why it's that specific registry edit.
Also, if you deleted keys and you don't know what your keys are, yeah, just go reset your PC. That's
Yep.
what a great solution.
But no matter how much time goes on, as long as the boomers still exist that remember those days,
Me, I remember those days. It was awful. Ugh.
that haze is always going to exist over the company. But in the end, Windows is simply just a bigger target to yell at.
Yeah, it is true because like if Windows is supposed to like be what it's supposed to be, Windows is only the way it is because they like fought tooth and nail for their monopoly in its early days in the first like 3 decades. Like that was the thing about Microsoft.
Apple doesn't have basically a monopoly on the PC market. They
Yes. I just said that. Thank you, Brodie. Okay.
have a lot more market share than Linux does, but that market share is on specific hardware that is designed only to run the Apple software.
That was actually Steve Jobs' engineering. So if you actually go and read about the process behind that, when Steve Jobs was starting up back at Apple, that was actually one of the reasons. Are you familiar with why Apple had the colored computers?
Because the 90s?
Because of the 90s, sure. But the reason they had it was because that was one of the ways they would actually differentiate themselves from other computer manufacturers. Because other computer manufacturers, there's usually just beige and brown and white. Kind of boring colors. But like with Apple, with Steve, when they did that, Apple releasing computers of colors, it's attention grabbing, visually interesting. That was all. Like it didn't matter if their operating system was a hunk of junk, which well absolutely was before like Next Step. Like before Next Step, macOS was kind of bad. I never did actually use Apple before Next Step though. Next Step post Next Step Apple was the only Apple I have ever.
Whereas Linux is competing on that exact same hardware that otherwise could be running Windows.
Sort of. Kind of. I mean, like, everyone treats open source like a war. I think DistroTube mentioned it in a video, but like, open source has already won. Like, the war has been fought, war has been won, open source has already won, which is why Microsoft is trying to move to embrace it now.
I don't think it's that open source is one. I think it's that open source is inevitable. Because I think that if open source doesn't exist, like if some company manages to kill them all off, somebody else is going to start it up because it is a good idea and inevitably someone is going to continue on with it.
I'm just talking about from like an infrastructure standpoint. Like from an infrastructure standpoint, that already solidified like the win of open source.
So at this point, calling Microsoft bad is kind of a bit of a sport, and you're always going to be angry at your direct competitor. But let me know your thoughts.
Okay. That's the end of the video. Oh, speaking of which, look, is that you? I can go look.
Me?
Oh, Mr. Mike.
Oh, wow.
I think it's you. I can go look. I can confirm. Oh well. Whatever. Alright, that's the end of that. That's the end of the video. It literally took us an hour and 2 hours to get through a whole video. 1 8-minute video. Yeah, I don't know how this is going to turn out. I hope you enjoy. This is more of a social experiment, so to speak. Remember back when YouTube was like all pranks and social experiments?
I mean, I can see why people do this kind of content for streaming, because a lot of times you're sitting there and you have stuff that you could say, but you don't have any prompt for what to say. And so if you're sitting there watching a video, even if it's not on topic to the video, it is something that prompts an idea, and then you can talk about it.
Is it sad that like I have you guys pay money and then like I basically just commit the sins that the cardinal sins that every person does, just you have to pay for it? That will be funny. You know, next week there's gonna be the gaming stream. Yeah.